Hello everyone. Hi, thank you very much for I welcome you here. Thank you very much for being here with me. I hope you already had a great conference up to now, and we're going to discuss about the latest changes in Spring Security. There is a QR code there. I will also show it at the end of our discussion, and it's for getting, fortunately, this copy of my last book at the end. So for those of you who want to have the chance to get this paper copy, maybe signed if you want, just scan the QR code and leave your name there. I promise I will not do anything with your name afterwards, and it's just the name I need. We're going to discuss about everything that's new in Spring Security. Now I can assume that you are using Spring Security because you are here. No, are you using Spring Security? A lot of people, yeah, that's what I thought. And if you are using Spring Security, you know that Spring Security anyway changes everything about every 6 months, no? So there is a good chance that maybe you don't know already because you haven't upgraded what's new. It's like when you go to a supermarket, buy some milk, and suddenly the milk is no longer where you thought it is. It's in the other side of the supermarket because they used to change this overnight. No, put everything in the other place just for you not to find out where it is. Or you can say, hey, it's probably everything that ChatGPT doesn't know yet. So hopefully I will bring you with some new information about Spring Security. If you haven't scanned the QR code, no worries, I will have it at the end, where you also have the chance to ask the last questions. If you have questions, don't hesitate to ask them also throughout the discussion. So please don't raise your hand because I won't see you probably, just shout. And I will try to repeat the question after you, and hopefully I will know how to answer it. And if I don't know how to answer it, I will try to answer it afterwards, after I do some research. So about me a little bit. So my name is Laurențiu. Most people know me for my YouTube channel and for the books that I've wrote. In case you want, you can follow me on social media. Do follow me. We can discuss also afterwards if there are things that I will not cover during these 50 minutes of the presentation. And you can always stay in touch, and you can find a lot more detailed what we want to discuss today on my YouTube channel. So it makes sense to subscribe if you want to see some juicy content on Java. Okay, let's get started. One of the biggest changes, and one of the changes that I like the most, is the completely decommission of the Web Security Configure Adapter class. So how many of you managed already to upgrade their configuration, security configuration from, let's say, 2.6, Spring Boot 2.6 to 3 point something? About a half of you. So it is very possible that the others didn't yet change the Web Security Configure Adapter. It was not completely removed from the beginning, so you might have had a chance, like if you upgrade to, I think it was 2.7 when they only deprecated it, but it was not removed already, that you have changed this. But there is a good chance that you might have not already changed this. So one of the biggest changes is maybe less than a year ago, it was completely removed, the Web Security Configure Adapter. So if you try to upgrade your dependencies, and that's basically exactly what I'm going to do after I will show you on a few slides all the changes. We're going to go into a demo example, into a demo project, and we are going to upgrade the example from, let's say, Spring Boot 2.6 to 3 point something, and you will see all this happening. If you haven't upgraded yet, you might have you might be still using the Web Security Configure Adapter and be overriding the configure method. That's the old way of configuring the endpoint authorization rules, and not only. And what we do now is use a security filter chain bin instead. This change has a lot of advantages, and the biggest advantages is, of course, the flexibility, because now you have a bin that you plug in the Spring context, so it's easier to access it, and it's of course easier to mock it whenever you need to test it, for example. So we can say that the maintainability of the application has been your application has been improved. The testability of your application has been improved, because now it's suddenly a lot easier to test your security configurations. And I'm not sure how many of you do test the security configurations, but you should do that in case you don't already. And I will show you when we code on the example where you can now easily extract the configurations and test the implementations that you provide to Spring Security. So through this, let's say, modularity approach is a lot better to implement a lot easier to implement your apps, and a lot easier to test them. So this is how it looks like now. So instead of having the configure method, you have the bin security filter chain. Spring Security provides you with a build method, so it's a very simple builder. Just return it, and since we've added the @bin annotation there, it will be automatically put into the context. A few other changes that you will observe are related to namings of methods that you might have been very often used, like authorized requests has been changed, and now it's named authorized HTTP requests. So I'm not sure what you think about it, but I think it's a better naming. And authorized HTTP request, no, because you always use this to what? To set the authorization rules, authorization configuration rules at the endpoint level. So we can assume it's about a web application. So we can assume it's about HTTP, but having the HTTP in the name, it's a lot better. And you still see that in this slide that I've made to show you the steps of the upgrade, I'm using a chaining approach, meaning that the anyRequest method is followed, it follows immediately after the authorized HTTP requests. And you will be maybe or not surprised to hear that this is no longer an approach that is possible in the latest version. So the next step in upgrading, in case that's what you're going to do, is use the implementation of a customizer. Again, the implementation of a customizer is one of the changes that I like the most, because now suddenly you can easily extract what is that customizer. It's an interface, and through that lambda expression, for example, here, it's an implementation of that interface. So you can suddenly extract it as a separate object that you can test, no? Which is something that was, of course, definitely a lot more difficult to do if you were using the chaining approach. So I was actually a fan of using the chaining approach until I had the possibility to use the implementation with a customizer, because I have observed that this way of working and writing our configurations in Spring Security makes a lot more sense in terms of at least the maintainability of your source code, and of course its testability. And of course, we have probably used a lot of times ANT matchers, MVC matchers, probably more rarely regex matchers if ever, but I'm definitely sure that maybe almost all of you here have heard at least once about ANT matchers and MVC matchers, and you have used them, have you? No? So how many of you actually used ANT matchers? Only ANT matchers. And MVC matchers? Okay, so that's one of the reasons I'm very happy that I see these methods being decommissioned, and as you're going to see, they are replaced with the request matchers method, is because there is a difference between ANT matchers and MVC matchers, and there is a good chance that you might not know what the difference is. I'm curious, be honest now, who doesn't know the difference between ANT and MVC matchers? So a lot of people know. And you know, the difference is really important, because ANT matchers, which most of the people have used, because if you will make a research, you will see that you will find easier with examples on Stack Overflow and any other forum that you might use to find solutions for your problems. Is actually less restrictive. So if you don't use the correct ANT pattern, you might end up securing a path, but allowing the same thing to happen through a different path that links to the same controller. And that's something that can introduce vulnerabilities in your application, meaning that something you secured, it's actually accessible through another path. That's something that you could avoid using MVC matchers, for example, but it creates a lot of confusion, no? Because the two of them looked very similar, so both of them actually simply received an ANT expression as a parameter, and it looks like they are the same, so hey, we are using whichever it's on the Stack Overflow forum, no? So yeah, that doesn't need to happen anymore. You don't have to be stressed anymore about that, because you will not be able anyway to use them. You will use request matchers and that's it. You will also observe a change in the access method, which previously was only used for securing or writing the authorization configurations through spell expressions. So that's a simple spell there. Of course, it doesn't really make sense to use it with is authenticated. You would probably use it with longer and more complex Spring expressions. Well, this is exactly what's wrong with it, because if you will take a look in many projects, I did that a lot because I'm also working as a consultant, you will see that the authorization configurations written as spell expressions, which are very long, are also, the longer they are, the more difficult are to understand. And even if you understand them, the more difficult they are to debug. So instead of encouraging people to use long Spring expressions, we can use, for example, an object which is an implementation of an interface. It's called the Authorization Manager interface, and suddenly it makes things a lot easier, because you will now be able to simply just put a breakpoint on the code and simply debug it in case it's something long. So I never recommended the use of long Spring expressions, spells. If it's a long spell, you should always, from my point of view, write Java code instead. So this is, yeah, the Web Expression Authorization Manager, basically, because what I show here on the slide is the difference, is the upgrade itself. The Web Expression Authorization Manager is an implementation of the interface provided directly by Spring Security, because you should have an easy way to upgrade. No, and even if you have this case where you have used at some point a longer spell, you might not want to start refactoring it from the very beginning. So you want to have an easy way to upgrade your dependency without having to make a lot of changes. So you simply just use an instance of the Web Expression Authorization Manager, and this syntax works exactly as the other one used to work. And the last slide before we go into the demo session is maybe the smallest but a very nice change, the Enable Global Method Security, which, as you might know, enables the possibility of putting authorization annotations over methods throughout any bean of your application, is now simply Enable Method Security. It's a very small change, but we were forced to use that pre-post enabled true flag, because with the enable global method security annotation, the 3 flags that are related to different kinds of annotations that you can use, the secure, the roles allowed, and of course the pre-post annotations, the 4 pre-post annotations, they are all of them set to false. But we all know that the pre-post enabled is probably the one that you now use, because it's kind of the convention, no? So you know what I mean. You don't really need to have it enabled, because it should be by default enabled, and that's what enable method security does. Now let me go to a small example in my IntelliJ, and what I'm going to show you here is a very simple demo. We're going to focus only on the security configurations. Hopefully the text is the font is large enough for you to see it from the behind. Is it? Okay, fine, cool. So what we can see here is we have a project, 2.6 point something, Java 17, yeah, 21. Java 21, and we want to upgrade it to Spring Boot 3 point something. Let's see what happens if we do that. So I'm just going to write 3 point something, 1.4, and then try to refresh. One of the things that I know it happened is also that the MySQL dependency repository has moved. So I think before being able to do anything on our configuration, we'll also have to upgrade that, which I know is not related to Spring Security, but if we want to prove that this piece of code still compiles, we'll have to change it. Okay. So fine enough, looks good, and I can go now to our configuration and see what happens here. And this is the security configuration. Ugh, a lot of blood. Let's start. So I think we can start with the first that you have seen. So web security configure data doesn't exist anymore, no? So we can simply cut it out. Yes, Copilot, no, I don't want to extend that class anymore. Thank you very much. And then what I can do is I can prepare to have the bean that will be the security filter chain bean. So I can simply transform the override annotation into a bean annotation, and of course then the method should return something which is a security filter chain. The name of the method doesn't need to be changed, but of course maybe you want to at least change it to something that is relevant. And we know that we'll now have to return something at the very end. Of course, still not working. We still have a lot of things that we need to change here. So first, the HTTP basic method doesn't compile anymore. Why? Because now all the methods used to configure anything need to have a customizer implementation as a parameter. So in case you had this situation where there is nothing afterwards, it means you are not configuring anything within that method. It means that you can actually use a customizer with defaults, which is absolutely nothing interesting. It's just a lambda expression doing nothing. Okay, you can put that as well, but it's maybe easier to read if you use the customizer with defaults method. And now we made it work. Now we have to go to the next one, next line 27, where we authorize the request. We've already learned that authorized request is no longer a thing. No, now it's called authorized HTTP requests. And anyway, still doesn't work because guess what? The same as any other method, we have to use a customizer object. So what I will do is I will end the expression here, and then unlike the previous line where I could use the customizer with defaults, I will not be able to do the same now, because as you can see in the case of this configuration, I do some stuff. So all that stuff will have to somehow be done through the configurer itself. Now, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take them from here and move them here, and that's almost it. Okay, so something like this. And next thing, there is no MVC matchers anymore. No, there is no MVC matchers. Now it's called request matchers. Almost there. We are using access. So we have a couple of possibilities here. We can be very eager and take the spell expression and put it into an object that extends the authorization manager interface, or we can be lazy. We can say, hey, not for now, and we can use simply for this upgrading what's provided by Spring Security already. And finally, it seems to at least compile. I promise you it works, it does the same thing, but please take a look at the difference. Now, putting all this here, well, this is nothing like it will look like in a real application. Why? Because in a real app, you will have probably more than just that. A couple of lines. That's because it's a simple example. But a real app looks the configuration for authorization endpoints looks a little bit more complicated. So having the Lambda expression as an implementation gives you also the chance to extract it separately into a different class, for example, that now you can easily test. And you will have a shorter, easier to read configuration, and you can choose what you need to read in detail, going deep into that specific object only if you need that. So the maintainability of your application, of your security configuration is definitely improved. Now, I will leave it like this for the moment, but for an example, take a look at the course configuration we have here. So it's really ugly to have it right there. Normally, I would have moved it somewhere else so that I only have course, and if I really want to see what the course configuration looks like, I would go to that specific class only in that case. Okay, so try to keep your security configurations as simple as possible, moving the parts, the pieces of your configuration in separate classes, and of course properly testing them now that you have the chance to do that in a lot easier way. Still have some more to do now, so I need to do the same thing here with the CSRF configuration. And what you will observe now is that also ignoring add matches, which used to be a method you can use for telling Spring Security what to ignore in terms of the CSRF protection mechanism had only the name has changed to be consistent with the others into ignoring request matchers. I didn't put it on a slide, but you can see it now. And yeah, no semicolon. And that's almost it. So I have changed the configuration. Hopefully I haven't missed anything. No, and the only thing that still remains, just because we can, let's now also change the enable method security. It looks a little bit cleaner. Not a big difference, but if you go inside, you will see that pre-post enable, which, as I said previously, is the convention now. It can be used as a default, so only by applying the annotation, you don't have to put the flag on true anymore. So it wasn't that difficult, no? But this is not the last thing that that happens. So actually, the most juicy of the things that has appeared in the past months, or at least let's say a year since it was in a production ready version, is the Spring Authorization servers. Have you used already the Spring Authorization server? So let's see some hands up for who used. Just a few of you, okay? So I do recommend you take a look over the Spring Authorization server, because what it does, well, first of all, it's only at a glance of adding a starter in your Spring Boot application, and what it does now completing all the OAuth 2 architecture possibilities. So what I want to say is that you can implement any part of an OAuth 2 system with Spring. Even the client. I won't go into detailing the client because that's an old stuff now. The resource server and the authorization server, for those of you who are at least as old as I am and have used Spring Security previously, know that we had a separate dependency for that. So you had to add a separate dependency. There were some enable resource server, enable authorization server annotations. That was no longer than 3 years ago. It's not that much, no? You would say, hey, it's a long time since we've used that. No, it's not a long time. Like 3 years ago, what happened is that these projects have been decommissioned. A part, which is the one related to the resource server, has moved in Spring Security directly, so that now, as you will see, we have the possibility to simply just write HTTP auth resource server and configure it as any other authentication method, like you did with HTTP basic, like you did with form login, like you did with any other. But there was no replacement provided for the authorization server. And that was bad, because if you wanted to create a custom authorization server, like I don't want to use Keycloak for some reason, or Okta, or any other already provided product that I can configure. There were organizations that needed to create something custom for reasons that we don't necessarily need to discuss now, but they needed that, and there are still organizations that need that. So the questions were then, and I had a lot of these questions. What do we do? Do we use the deprecated library, because it kind of does what we need? Do we implement our own from scratch? Like, all the solutions smelled. Fortunately, now we have a usable framework to build an authorization server, and as I will hopefully prove you today, is kind of straightforward to use. So I don't want to say it's easy, because depending on how much you want to configure it, there are stuff to be done. It's a framework still. You need to customize it. Some things are out of the box, some things are by convention, but many things are there to be customized, and that's what you need to do as a developer. But at least, in my opinion, it makes things simple enough. Not easy, but simple, okay? So not only that, now we have the possibility to implement a resource server through Spring Security, but we have a Spring Security provided way for implementing our custom authorization server. And these are actually the components that we need to define if we want a simple authorization server that issues JVT tokens. Yeah, I'm going to demo it now in the next 20 minutes. Hopefully it won't take me more than 20 minutes. I will try to be as fast as possible, just to show you that it is possible to build that minimum in 20 minutes. Actually, it would be even faster than that. Why? Because what I will show you is still some customizing. Normally with the latest version now, I will almost be able to only add the starter there and a couple of beans and it will work. But I don't want to do that. I want to make it a little bit more realistic, like show you what you are going to use, not and not just spin up some Spring Boot application and that's it, and it works. And then if we have enough time, maybe we try to use the most used of the grant types, which is the authorization code with PKCE, proof key for code exchange. And yeah, before going further, let's actually try to build our own application. So you are going to build it together with me, and make sure that you're attentive, because I always make a lot of mistakes. So how do we name it? Authorization server. Okay. Okay, looks good. Not that it matters. No, Java 21. And then the only dependencies I need to add, so if I want to use the authorization code grant type, I need to enable the form login, and I need to provide a way to the user to authenticate. So I'm going to use the web dependency, I'm going to use Spring Security, and since recently, very recently, you can directly add a starter for the authorization server directly from the Spring initializer. So that's why it's here, and I can add it, and I can just continue by creating the project. So what do I have here? A Gradle project, because that's how the initializer creates it since a few months, a year, I'm not sure exactly. It used to be Maven as the default, but nothing that we care about. And I'm just gonna be able, it still builds. I'm gonna be able to add a configuration package, and then I will write the configuration class for the authorization server. So this is it. And let's name this the authorization server config. By the way, all the code will be on a GitHub repo that I will provide it with you at the end. So we use the configuration annotation. No enable authorization server. We just need to define the security filter chain beans. So I will have a bean that configures the authorization server, and I will have a bean that configures the authorization rules for the web app itself. Okay, something like that. We can name it. Of course, we need to make sure that we have the bean annotation above, and you know that you need to inject the HTTP security. And I'm going to show you already that we need to throw an exception here, because that happens when I call the build method. So that's it. Now, there is a static util method that allows you to set up the default of the configurations, which you can now then customize. So it's called OAuth2 authorization server configuration apply default security. And what you can do is call that at the beginning, and then you can say HTTP get configurer. You get the proper configurer that you want to override, which should be the authorization server configurer, and then you can configure whatever you want. So for example, one of the things that a lot of you probably will use is enabling the OpenID Connect protocol, because by default it's disabled. By default it's simply an OAuth 2 server. If you want to enable the OpenID Connect features, which are on top of OAuth 2, then you have to explicitly do that. Being set to be similar to everything else in Spring Security, the configuration, in case you want to do something, will be still through a customizer. So all the methods in Spring Security now through which you can apply configurations or customizations, you should use a customizer for that. So at least you should expect them to have a customizer and be able to set the customization exactly as I have shown you at the beginning of this presentation. So that's one of the things, and I think there is one more thing that I want to set here, because if I'm using the authorization code grant type, I want to somehow be sure that the login page is not restricted. So what I can do, I can use some exception handling, and I can tell it that the authentication entry point for login is this one, and I provide /login being the default path. I just use it. Normally you can, of course, override it as well. And something is missing here probably. Look, here it is. No? And then I need to write the second bin, which is for my application security filter chain. Let's say app security filter chain. And in this filter chain, I'm only going to set up the authentication rules and authentication and authorization rules for the endpoints. Now it's also a bin. I have two bins, so I'm going to have to define an order for them. So let's make the first one with the priority 1 and the second one with priority 2. Same thing. So we have HTTP build, and of course that means we have to throw the exception. And have you seen what was Copilot suggesting me? Something like, maybe I can make it that again. Oh, this, yeah. Okay, never do that. Okay, never return and then make it easy to read. Please do that. So put it on multiple lines, exactly as you see me doing here. Don't try to put everything in a block. You can have, for example, form login, of course, customizer with defaults in our case, just to be simple, on a line. So it defines the authentication, then it defines the authorization. No Copilot, we don't have add matchers anymore. So request matchers, and then what I'm gonna do is, request authentication for any of such cases. Okay, so that's the minimum that we need. What else? We need, according to our diagram here, to also have the user details management and the client details management, because we authenticate users and clients. So what I need to do for the users, fortunately, is the same user details service that we use with any Spring security application since the beginning of Spring Security. So with that being said, for my example, adding an in-memory user details service would be enough for a demonstration. Normally, of course, you know, this one can be either implemented and customized, or you can use one of the implementations that Spring Security already provides. And what I'm going to do is just provide some user details implementation. How do we name our user? Let's call it Bill. And let's have the password. Let's have an authority, and we build it, and we make sure it is part of this in-memory user details service. What's the next? I would say you would say client details service now, because that's how it used to be named in the old Spring Security implementation, but now it's actually named register client repository. So I'm not sure exactly why the name was changed, but in case you are looking for that, it's no longer a client details service. It's called a register client repository. So that's what I'm going to also add as a bin. And I think that's exactly what I meant on this page when I said the register client is for the client, what the user details is for the user, just to have you a parallel between them. Okay, so again, to make things simple, we can use an in-memory client repository, but as you know, all these details will probably have to come from a database, and you will never have things as credentials, for example, directly in the code. You will have to secure them properly, so you will need to provide an implementation for the register client repository, thing that would be probably impossible for me to do in the rest of 15 minutes. I have to finish all this. So I'm going to just add the register client. this is an internal ID. You can put whatever you want here, but it's important not to make a confusion between the client ID and that ID. So the client ID is kind of the username of the client, then the client's secret is kind of the password for the client. And what do we need here? So we need some scopes. I can use any scope, but if I'm using OpenID Connect, then I should be able to use an OpenID Connect scope. And since I enabled OpenID Connect, I will do that. I will need to set at least a redirect URI in case I expect to use the authorization code grant type. And just to make things funnier, I will use the devox site here. And do we need anything else? Yes, maybe we need to specify an authentication method. Now, if we are using Pixie, that's not necessarily needed, but normally I would still use at least basic authentication even with the Pixie. And of course, we need to specify the grant types. And in my case, I have only the authorization code, but of course, in case I would like to have multiple, for example, I would like to also allow our client to use the refresh token grant type, so it doesn't have to ask for the user to log in every 20 minutes, for example. Then you can add multiple grant types. And again, I'm just creating here an in-memory app, but all of this should come from a database or somewhere. Then we can have the general settings of our authorization server. And I'm just going to use the default server settings, sorry. And I'm just going to use the default. But what you can do here is, if you need to customize the endpoints for the token authorization and so on, then you can do that here. If you don't do that, they will come with some defaults. And depending on what we use, if I want to use opaque tokens, then I don't need to do anything else. But if I want to use JVT, then I need to also provide the possibility, or at least the capability to the authorization server to have some keys to sign the token, and provide some public parts to a resource server to validate those tokens. No, because JVTs, they are signed. So if I need to do that, then I will need to provide the JW key source. And that's how you define it. And this is the component the server uses to manage the keys. Now, what I will do for this demonstration is I will simply define the keys, create a key at the startup of the application. But normally, you know what you have to do. You have to have, first of all, multiple keys, and you have to somehow read them from a vault. And of course, the code you will write here depends on exactly what your vault is and how you use it and where you put all the information. So let's see if I am able to very quickly define this using Java security. So I will use a key pair generator. To get some RSA key pair generator, we can initialize it to generate keys for the 2048 key size. And then we can generate a key pair, get the key pair, and then get the RSA public and private parts from the key pair. And the private one. Oops. Build an RSA key. and put it in a JWK set. Why it is a set? Because as I've said, normally you have more than one key. So the component, I use this implementation. You can define your own if you want by overriding this get method. This is the simple immutable implementation that contains the key set, the set of keys. And that's basically it. So if I didn't make any mistake, I should be able to run this application and prove that it works as the simplest probably authorization server. Now, you know, and I can understand you, in a real world app, you will not have it as simple as possible, but I at least proved that I could build it like in 20 minutes, the simplest solution, and is as customizable as it should be, so it should be fine. So something failed to start here, which I have no idea what exactly. Somehow crashes with another project or something. I have no idea. Anyway, let's just change the class name. I think it should work. Okay, and it started. And just to prove, I can go to a Postman and show you that I can access, for example, the web no OpenID configuration. Any authorization server that claims to be a real OpenID Connect authorization server should have this endpoint. You have here all the details about what it does, including the endpoints, the authorized endpoint, the introspection endpoint, the token endpoint, the keys endpoint. So, for example, if I'm gonna call this key endpoint, you will see the key with key ID one that we have created, and that starts at the beginning of the presentation with its public part. And then, of course, I still see I don't have a lot of time left, but I can try at least to call the authorization endpoint I have prepared here just to prove you that this is working as well. And well, it redirected me to login. No. And then what was the user? Bill and password. And something's not working because, yeah, of course. When something is not working, guys, the only thing that could be wrong is one of the parameters here. So let's check and see if we can find it in the short time that we have. But if not, you will trust me that I've only mistaken a parameter. So authorized OpenID client secret, and that's it. No password encoder mapped. Oh, sorry for that. So you always need to have a password encoder. Now we did assume we have them in plain text, no? So what we will do is we will use a no-op password encoder. And of course, let's remember the @bin annotation. So now it should work. If the app doesn't have a password encoder, same as any other Spring security configuration app, it cannot match the password, no? So it simply acts as, hey, I don't know how to interpret the password. So I'm using the no password encoder, which of course you should never use in a real world application, but it helps us to have something, and we will use plain text passwords, but normally you'll have like a bcrypt or an scrypt password encoder there. Okay, one more time, and was password, and much better. Yeah, it redirected us to the DevOps site. It's a 404 expected because I'm very sure that page doesn't exist on Devoxx, but you can see there that it provided me with the authorization code. So now having the authorization code, I can follow up on the flow and get the token. So if I use this new code I have just copied and call the token endpoint, here it is, an access token. And of course, if you want, we can prove that it is exactly as we expected. So for example, we can go to JVT, IO, and decode it and see what it contains. So it is indeed a token that was signed with key ID 1, and it contains the subject is Bill, the client, the audience is the client for which it was created, the client name client. It expires in about 300 seconds, and yeah, that's mostly it. Okay, so in just a few minutes, the guys here will kick me out, so I don't want to stay here too long. I'm used to talk like many hours on the subject. So yeah, before I'm ending the presentation, and of course you will have then 5 minutes for the questions, I wanted to show you which are the next sessions on security that I recommend. So you can join Daniel's talk later, or tomorrow you can join the talk delivered by my friend Thomas Vitale. And of course, remember that I had a short time and I'm used to talk a lot, but being that I couldn't deliver all the content that I wanted, because I would need the whole conference just for me in that case, and that's not possible, you can follow me on social media, and I have a lot more content there, and you can ask me questions that you might, for example, not think about now at exactly at this moment. You find everything, including the authorization server that I will push on the repo that you can see on the top. I prepared again the QR code so you can scan it, and then I will, immediately after all the questions, hopefully I will give this book to one of you. And please remember to rate my 5 stars there in the... Thank you very much, and your questions, please.
What's the point in testing security configuration? You mentioned earlier that the point of these customizer APIs is that you could write tests, but
Thank you very much. So the question is, what's the point in testing security configuration? Well, whenever you use any framework, whether it's Spring Security or any other framework, there is some assumption that when you upgrade it, things might change. For example, you saw earlier, I will not close the slide, but you saw earlier that AND and MVC matchers are no longer something, and now you use request matchers. Are you sure that upgrading and changing that to request matchers will work similarly? Well, there are cases actually in which they will not work the same. So what I'm doing usually is I'm testing the integration with Spring Security and including the configurations in some case to make sure that when I upgrade from one version to another, there are no cases that I have missed and that might introduce vulnerabilities to my application. So I hope that answered the question. Thank you.
To me, it was always the hardest when I was implementing a reactive app, that the structure of the security config was totally different from all the examples were for the servlet apps.
And now it looks similarly.
Aligning now.
Yeah, exactly. Good observation, actually. The question was, or at least the observation was, it was always difficult because when I was building reactive web applications, the configurations looked in a way, and when I was working on imperative ones, they looked a little bit differently. And now, indeed, they are aligned. So if you have seen, it's kind of the same concept. You don't have a web security configure adapter class. You have a bean. In case of reactive, it's called security web server filter. Now you have a similar way to implement it with imperative, and the best news is actually you'll probably not implement so often reactive anymore because now you'll have virtual threads, no? But yes, I agree with you, it does align. Any other question? Then I have 2 minutes And in these 2 minutes, I'm just going to my browser and I'm checking here, and I can see many of you guys want my book. The first is me, so I skip myself. I will start with row number 3, and I'm ending it with 59. So 3 to 59. Okay. And we have 55. And 55 is Steven. So Steven, yeah, please come here and I will give you the paper copy, and if you want I can sign it as well. Thank you very much for being here, guys. I wish you an excellent rest of the conference and safe travels afterwards.